Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Galaxy Beacon. I am Matt.
I'm Carly.
And I'm Rob.
And today we're coming at you fairly hot off the heels of the news that Solo has been nominated for an Academy Award in Best Visual Effects, which is super cool. Continues the streak of every Star Wars movie has been at least nominated for something, if not several things. So now kind of seems like the perfect time to go back and do kind of a retrospective review on it. So we're going to review the movie, give our thoughts about it, and kind of contextualize it and see how it's impacted the franchise as a whole. So we just watched it. Let's give our initial thoughts right off the bat. Carly, what were your initial experiences for this viewing?
My initial experiences.
Your initial thoughts coming right off of this experience of watching it. Does it still hold up? What were your immediate thoughts watching it?
I would say it still holds up. I still really enjoy it. I do find more things kind of to nitpick at every time I watch it, but I still really like this movie.
Yeah. And Rob?
Visually stunning film. It deserved definitely to be nominated for visual effects. The practical effects.
Yes,
the
Lady
CG
Proxima
effects.
looks so good.
Yeah, Lady Proxima looks really good.
And L3 with... most people don't realize that the actor was on set with with the actual droid attached to her, and then a green suit underneath the droid parts, and pretty much they weren't adding a droid over her. They were removing the green section, and just phenomenal. So that's really her acting that you're seeing, not a motion capture.
Yeah. I also really like this movie. I like this movie when we first saw it, because the three of us saw it in theaters together for the first time when it came out. And I remember I was one of those people who was very much like, why are we even making this movie? Like, no one cares about this. Who cares about a young Han Solo? I didn't even think Alden, in the trailers at least, looked like he was going to give much of a performance. But then, seeing that movie in theaters when it first came out and seeing it again today, I really love this film. And that's kind of where I want to start is, let's just start with Alden's performance. Because I think, to a degree, how good or bad the story is, one thing it always is going to hinge on is Alden's performance as young Han Solo. And I think that performance continues to get better with every rewatch.
Mm-hmm. He did a fantastic job. I do think it suffered a little from the recuts and the reshoots. For instance, when you initially are introduced to him, when you read the books or see the cutscenes or read the comics, you realize that initial scene was probably had a different vision going for it when he's driving with the stolen speeder. And the look on his face doesn't quite match the next scene, but it perfectly matched what that scene, from what I'm reading, was originally filmed for. And there's just all these great little moments where he does something that it's like, yeah, that's exactly how Harrison Ford would have acted in that moment as Solo. And I thought his acting was great. I think it did suffer a little from, editing issues and reshoots. But I think he did a great performance.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think his performance was really fantastic. I was definitely one of probably the most critical people. I am just in general very critical of trailers. And I did not want Solo to happen. Thought there were a million other things we could make movies about. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong. There probably still are. But
yeah,
this movie just kind of blew me out of the water. I just really was impressed by Alden. It's very clear that the moments that I thought were kind of his worst acting moments were exactly what were in the trailers, and everything else was phenomenal. I'm really not bothered by any of the cutscenes. It just kind of feels like maybe something else is going on in his head in those moments, so I don't really think they mess up anything with the pacing. Honestly, I just really expected to be underwhelmed by Alden's performance in this movie, and then like maybe overwhelmed by some of the other performances. And I found that the opposite was true, and that I was most impressed by Alden, and some of the other performances I wasn't as crazy about.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I was in the same boat where I was like, oh man, Childish Gambino is going to be Lando. I mean, how can you go wrong? And he certainly does
I don't think
well.
He doesn't go wrong necessarily.
No, certainly not. Like,
but
he's obviously very good, but I'm so focused on how much I'm enjoying Alden in a role that I didn't expect to enjoy him in that I end up favoring his performance over Donald Glover's. But I think, a lot of people have already talked about kind of the good and the bad in this movie. Before we dig into the nitty-gritty even more, I do want to kind of talk about, how does this movie contribute to the rest of Star Wars? Because this movie had some things in it that I've been desperately wanting out of mainstream Star Wars. The Maw scene, for example, where they have the giant space kraken. Like, that's something straight out of some, like, nonsense legend story that would have been in the old EU. And it was super cool to see that actually in a movie and to see, those kinds of things coming up in this film. So I thought this movie did a really good job of exploring kind of just sides of the Star Wars universe that I think we never really thought we were going to get to see on film. Mm-hmm. I would say for sure.
And one thing I'd like to say before we get too far from Glover's performance.
Sure.
Glover's best part was there was definitely a public Lando that was definitely what we see in the new trilogy. Yeah. The administrator of Cloud City, this is how I want people to perceive me.
Yeah.
And then there was freaking out Lando, which really is much more like Glover. But it was fantastic because you could tell when he had Lando turned on and Lando turned off, and they story-wise hit the right beats, and he did a perfect job handling the character. And I really hope that they plan on making more films with at least with Glover as Lando, because there's so many great stories you can tell with him.
Oh yeah, I agree. I would love to see any of the cast return. I don't know what's in store for Kira when she goes to see Maul, but assuming she somehow survives, I would definitely not be opposed to seeing how that story continues. Absolutely.
Maybe not even a movie. Now that Disney has the streaming service where they can do these limited run television shows, like an 8 episode show where you can get 8 hours of screen time with a movie level production.
Just a variety show that has just a single episode that ties up like some things and a bunch of different
so many options. Yeah. So many options.
I think it would be cool to get a series kind of like an anthology Star Wars series, kind of like what Clone Wars was, where we would have certain story arcs that focused on certain characters and certain story arcs that focused on other characters, but kind of an anthology series for the Star Wars underground. So you might have a series of episodes that focuses just on Lando, and then we might do something with Kira, because I would definitely love to see these people come back. I mean, do you think...
Beckett and Val. I don't think they could have a whole TV series or a whole movie, but they could definitely have a couple episodes of a show.
Yeah, Val was someone who I really wish we had gotten more of in this movie a little bit. Val came across as a really cool character. She was, again, kind of a wasted female character in Star Wars, which is a little bit of an unfortunate sort of trend that we see in these films. But she is good for while she's there. Are there any characters, Carly, that here, be it Alden's Han Solo or Val or Beckett, any characters you would like to see more of in something?
Maybe not any of them, but I would like to see more Enfys Nest.
Yeah, that's true. That's the big one. Enfys Nest.
Or just the Marauders in general.
Yeah.
Everything they're doing, really. Like, we've gotten a little bit. We touch on, like, Enfys Nest interacting with Saw Gerrera, but that's about it. That's about all we have seen her in.
Enfys Nest was one of the really big surprises first time watching this movie, when she takes off the helmet and reveals that, she's not this big scary marauder. She's this young, she's this fairly young girl who's not much younger than Han in this movie, and she was immensely interesting. I loved her. I loved her design. Even before we know her deal, she's just really, really awesome. The way she fights, the way, her costume design is. She was an amazing character through and through, who only got better when we got the reveal at the end. And the way that was all handled with Han, working with the good guys while still learning to be kind of a worse person because of what Beckett taught him. I think it perfectly sets up the character that he's going to become by the time we get to episode 4. So I think that's all done really well, honestly.
By the way, Rio Durant, which was voiced by Jon Favreau, apparently, was also a great one that I think... Mm-hmm. And he has all those little anecdotes and little stories.
Yeah.
You could throw a Rio Durant episode into any anthology TV series.
He's really fun. I don't feel like we get a lot of time with him, but... Yeah.
No, we don't get much time with Beckett's crew before they die, but that train heist sequence is super fun. So we do get them in action for that scene, but they're both really fun characters. And Rob, you're a little bit more, you're a big Empire fan. Is there anything in this movie, military Empire-wise that you were really excited to see?
Actually seeing the Empire in entrenched warfare, actually doing something, not just landing on a planet and going in and attacking. That's what we're used to seeing. That's what we see with the First Order. That's what we see with the Empire. You never see them... And then you see like a small outpost on some place like Endor where they just built a station. But this was actual warfare to take over a planet. It was a long-term siege, almost like World War I trench fighting. Yeah. But what I enjoyed about the movie, although in the cutscenes there's an extended version of the scene, and I wish that they had left most of it in, what I liked about it was it felt more like Saving Private Ryan or a true war film. You couldn't focus on anything because it had that entire shaky cam. Mm-hmm. There was mud everywhere. It was not, the glorified battle. It was, this is what it looks like when the battle's over and people are picking up the pieces.
Yeah.
And you don't really get to see that type of thing, especially in the Empire. And you kind of cared when you saw Han's other fellow troopers dying, because at least they meant something to Han, because he was fighting there with them. But it was nice to see a battle from the Imperial perspective where they weren't necessarily the enemy and they weren't really the bad guys necessarily. Although, once we get into the camp, pretty much everyone hated Han. Mm-hmm. They had a Wookiee chained up for no reason in a pit. There was many other issues that was very Empire-based. But it was just nice to see the Empire in a non-negative way during a battle, because usually we're like, yeah, kill him, shoot him.
It was nice to see the Empire just not be the main, because I'm not, when it comes to the Galactic Civil War era, the original trilogy era, it's a little easy for me to get burned out on that era. So, Rogue One, it's just, they're fighting the Empire, it's pretty standard stuff. It was cool to me to see a movie set in Galactic Civil War era where the Empire is there and they're a large part of the story, but they are not the be-all, end-all. At the end of the day, this is a fight between warring criminal factions, and the Empire is there as an antagonistic force, but they're just kind of in the background, and they're used so infrequently in this movie that when they show up, it's actually cool. Yeah, exactly. When they're going through the maelstrom, the nebula, whatever, and the lightning strikes, and you see the Star Destroyer. Like, it's so striking because this is not the 12th Star Destroyer I've seen this movie. This is, like, the first time I'm seeing one, and that whole sequence in the theaters was so striking because of that.
Okay. And you're right. It was really nice to see the Empire in a position where it was just basically the civil government at that time.
Yeah.
It could have been the Corellian security forces if they wanted to use those. It could have been, even Republic, Rebel Alliance, wouldn't have mattered. They were the authority that the characters were naturally fighting because of, they were criminals. so it wouldn't matter who was in control. So it didn't paint them. It was like the police in a cops and robbers movie. They're not necessarily evil. They're just the people that they're working against at that moment in the movie.
Yeah. Did you like the Empire in this movie?
Yes, I love anytime there are TIE fighters on screen is pretty much when I'm in for the Empire in a movie. Or the First Order. I love TIE fighters.
You do like TIE fighters.
I love when they're going through the Kessel Run and the Star Destroyer shows up and TIEs come out. And these just must be the most brave TIE pilots in all of the Empire. They're just the best of the best because they just go ahead and chase the Millennium Falcon into the Maelstrom. So I think those are more dedicated troops than we see in the entire original trilogy.
The Millennium Falcon.
The best of the best.
Millennium Falcon has a knack for leading TIE fighters into dangerous locations because that almost kind of foreshadows when the Millennium Falcon will lead those TIE fighters into the asteroid belt in Empire. That's just something the Millennium Falcon loves to do.
The asteroid belt is just an asteroid belt. This is the Maelstrom that everyone knows about, and there's a specific path through it that everyone avoids everything around it. And
but the TIE fighters are truly the elite people in the Empire. You in order for mainline grunt troops to be a TIE fighter pilot. Yeah. It is something huge.
Well, I mean, you look at the Special Forces, Iden Versio's team, they're all TIE pilots. They're wearing TIE pilot Special Forces armor, so.
I suppose a TIE fighter pilot would be more like a Navy pilot that did, in our world, Air Force pilots are not typically as when you find the famous astronauts, they almost always were Navy pilots who had done aircraft carriers. Mm-hmm. And they are the elite pilots of the United States military forces. Even though there's an Air Force, it's really those people. And I view the TIE fighters pretty much being like Navy pilots. Now, I'm not big into military history. Don't flame me in the comments. But that's my understanding is, the really good test pilots and everything else traditionally were Navy pilots, not Air Force pilots.
Yeah. So yeah, lots of good stuff with the Empire there. A lot of good stuff with the way Han is handled as a character. I guess let's go ahead and kind of talk about his relationship with Kira. Even they have kind of a back and forth with the dice that we'll see later. I mean, obviously they wouldn't have focused on the dice so heavily if it weren't for The Last Jedi. What did you think of his relationship with Kira? And how does that change your view on the character we know in A New Hope, or does it?
I mean, I don't think it really changes my view on Han in A New Hope. I think, if anything, this movie sets up the Han that I'm just yeah, this is the guy that we would meet in A New Hope. I believe that he would be this person in 10 years. I really liked Kira, and I didn't expect to.
Yeah.
Because that was another thing about this movie coming out, was I was just why on earth do I need to see Han with someone other than Leia? That feels like something I don't need to see. And it didn't really strike me in a bad way in this movie. His relationship with Kira feels real, and the way it ends, I'm just yeah, this makes sense. I don't, it doesn't feel like this is the, one true love that he's gonna lose and then just, end up with Leia. It's just that he loved this girl, and then this didn't really end that well, and he moves on.
Yeah. No, I agree. Because that was my worry as well, as I knew we were going to get...
I just didn't want them to, belittle the relationship between Han and Leia.
No, and I think that Kira works... I think Kira is honestly a great character in and of herself. Yes. I know a lot of people do talk about that they feel Val was a wasted chance for another good female character in Star Wars that we're potentially lacking here, and I agree with that to a degree, certainly. But I think Kira is actually a very great character, and I think she gets overlooked a little bit. But kind of what her story is, the way that she gets herself out of Corellia by essentially doing things that she knows Han would never have been able to do. When Emphas Nest is talking about the people who got their tongues cut out, you look at Kira's face, she looks kind of horrified, and you could almost see in her face, like, she might have been there for that. You know what I'm saying?
Or it's at least not something that she wouldn't do.
Yeah, or it's at least something
Yeah.
she's like, yeah, that I believe that the organization I work for would definitely
Yes.
do that. And yeah, it's interesting because she tells Han, if you had stayed, they would have killed you. It's not because they necessarily would have killed him right away, but it's because he would have refused to do the things that she would have been willing to do to survive.
And
Because he's too much of a good person.
And in those type of positions, once you refuse to do something, you become worthless to them. She was able to move up the ranks because she refused nothing, is essentially the vibe I was getting.
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know if we really want to talk about expanded stuff, but she was essentially just, like, sold into slavery was how she got out of this. And then while she was being, like, her slaver kind of got, like, captured by Voss, and she escaped jail and, like, killed all of her captors and everything. And then as she was escaping, she just ran into Dryden. And he was just like, yeah, you're pretty impressive. And so he was like, I'm just going to take you under my wing and teach you all this stuff.
Oh, wow. I know about this.
Yeah.
On her, like, way out of escaping, essentially.
Gotcha. Okay.
Was this in one of those shorter junior novels, or was it in a book that I didn't read the Han Solo novelization?
I honestly don't
all
remember if
honesty.
it was from... Because I've watched, like, the Galaxy Adventures thing, and I've read... I want to say it was in a comic.
Was it in one of the IDW comics?
I don't think so.
Those ones are
not
for
the kids
little
one.
kids.
No.
Nah, no.
Yeah. But the junior novels, they sometimes will get a little bit dark. But
Maybe.
I can't think
I
of what
honestly
one
don't
it might be.
remember what it was in.
Well, that's neither here nor there. If anyone knows what it is, just go ahead and drop a link in the comments. But yeah, I mean...
And I'll upvote you. It's all our channel can offer right now is upvotes.
But yeah, I like Kira quite a bit. And then at the end, when she essentially takes the opportunity to, she could have gone with Han, but she instead decides to say, no, this was all Tobias Beckett, to essentially get Han's name off of Crimson Dawn's hit list, and then just go ahead and get herself essentially, potentially put into Dryden Voss's position, assuming that she survives whatever Darth Maul wants to talk to her about on Dathomir. Which, let's talk about that real quick. We all saw this movie in theaters. We all collectively lost it when Darth Maul showed up, played by Ray Park, voiced by Sam Witwer, in a film again.
Ultimate duo.
Just the perfect Darth Maul.
Oh, so good. That was... Whew, man. I mean, Darth Maul is one of my favorite characters, who was expanded upon in Clone Wars and Rebels.
I mean, I think we were all kind of, like, standing up in our seats, and I was sitting right next to just some other guy, and he didn't even look like he knew what was going on, and I was just like, how are you not freaking out?
Well, and I gotta imagine it must be weird, because, like,
Yeah.
it's hard for us talking and you guys listening. We're all obviously big Star Wars fans, so we know that Maul came back for Clone Wars and Rebels, but, like, the average, I promise you, tons of people went to see this movie who have not watched Clone Wars or Rebels, because, just, they're not, like, super mega Star Wars fans, which is fine, obviously.
There were 60-year-old women in that audience who had not seen anything since the original trilogy.
Like, there are...
And they went because they remember. One woman I talked to a few weeks after seeing it said, oh yeah, I went to see it. I went and saw the original Star Wars in theaters 20 times, specifically because I loved Han Solo.
Yeah.
There was no way I was missing this.
Nice.
She hadn't seen anything since Return of the Jedi, but she went and saw this.
But
she loved it.
Even besides people like that, but I mean people who saw the prequels in theaters and then went to see this without keeping up with any of the other material, seeing Darth Maul again must have been
Weird.
Yeah, just
Why
weird.
is he here?
Whereas people who know the material are just like, no, this actually makes sense that he could potentially be here. I mean, and then we have to figure out what changes for him from here until where he's a homeless bum on Malachor.
And I think that's interesting that he relapses, because originally the last thing we knew before we find him at Malachor, before Solo came out, was Sidious had met him on Mandalore and is like, hey, you're messing up my plans, this has to end, and he takes him and his brother out.
Yeah.
And then he captures him. In the comics, he gets out, but that one there were some questions if that was going to be canon or not. It did remain canon.
Yeah, but from like here to his appearance in Rebels, like clearly, like I don't know if
He's had a
Enfys
relapse.
Nest and everyone took down the Syndicates, or if the Empire took down the Syndicates, but like someone clearly did. Crimson Dawn isn't around anymore, and Darth Maul's not the head of it, and he's
The Hutts
just...
still have power. The Hutts are still...
Are they? Yeah, I guess I don't know what all the 5 Syndicates are.
Well, considering that
I just know this is one of them.
Yeah. I mean, considering that Darth Maul is in charge, or I guess just Maul, considering that he's in charge, I'm not sure he would be super excited to do any sort of work with the Empire like the Hutts might be willing to. So it could have been the Empire approached him and he was too stubborn to try to cut a deal, and so he just kind of went down. Like, who knows?
So, I mean, we got the Pikes, we got Black Sun, we have the
Crimson
Hutts, and Crimson Dawn. So, what would the mystery 5th be?
I'm just gonna
Or
look
the
it
Hutts
up.
not considered part of the Syndicate thing because they're kind of their own separate organization.
Well, we'll double check that. But while Carly's double checking that,
Although I guess in Clone Wars, there was another organization that Maul...
Okay, so it is... Well, that's odd because it lists 6 here.
The 6 crimes, they're the hidden one.
It's called the 5 Syndicates, but it lists 6 as the Black Sun, the Cremora Syndicate, Crimson Dawn, the Hutt Clan, the Pike Syndicate, and Sontul Pride.
okay.
So I don't know which one of those is taken off to make it the 5 Syndicates, but...
But yeah, I mean, the reveal of Darth Maul was really cool. And it was a good setup for, I mean, I don't know, hopefully, but the thing is that Solo was, you know, it didn't flop or anything. It did fine. It did about as well as like a mid to low tier Marvel, you know, cinematic universe film. You know, it didn't do poorly.
This was basically no real media push to go see it.
It basically did about as well as, like I said, like a mid-tier MCU film, but they seemed to be expecting it to do like Force Awakens or Last Jedi numbers, which it was, I feel like, never gonna do anyways.
Or Rogue One numbers. Rogue One did phenomenal.
Well, you have to keep in mind that Rogue One was the first anthology movie, so a lot of people went to see that just on sheer, you know, this
Curiosity.
is sheer curiosity. I think Solo, you know, was a mix of, you know, poor marketing was the biggest factor at play there, and they didn't do a good job of assuring people that after the whole replacement of the director's fiasco that the film was still going to be all right.
I mean, it also still just came out like 4 months after Last Jedi left theaters.
And we still had the
everyone
entire...
had just watched Last Jedi,
True.
and that was so controversial.
Yep, and everyone was boycotting things for no reason.
Yeah,
EA
exactly.
had just released Battlefront, and people were equating the whole it's EA with Star Wars. It was getting bad.
It was a perfect storm of kind of the worst time to release an anthology movie that not a ton of people were super hyped about the concept of in the first place. You know, I don't think any of those issues would have affected, like, a Kenobi movie with Ewan McGregor. Like, I think none of those issues would have affected that. But the fact that it's a Solo movie with a relatively untested lead, combined with the truncated marketing, combined with the Battlefront controversy, combined with the fairly divisive nature of Last Jedi, at least divisive enough that there's a loud, vocal group of people, minority or not, to voice their distaste for it. You know, I think it was just a perfect storm of things that caused this movie to not perform quite to the level that they wanted, but certainly not unsuccessful. You know, certainly made its money back and then some by quite a bit.
Oh, I mean, I hear different things. I hear that they had a marketing budget which was clearly wasted.
Yeah.
Whatever. And another thing, and this is horrifying, the soundtrack on this was phenomenal.
Oh, really good.
Yeah, and it deserved a nomination.
And they didn't even submit it.
It was never submitted. I know. But here's the weird part. Like, I collect vinyl, any Star Wars soundtrack that comes out in vinyl, I'm going to get it.
Yeah.
Because I keep vinyl anyway, because I just, you know, I like the display, all the neat things that come with vinyl. Nope. no attempt to put this on vinyl. And I'm not even sure the whole soundtrack is on the CD.
And that's really frustrating to me because I do really like the score here. I mean, the opening, the like semi-cold opening, and then when the solo title comes up and they're playing that theme, that fanfare.
Yeah, the solo theme is really good.
It's so good. And Enfys Nest, anytime Enfys Nest is on screen, I'm visually happy, and I'm just in sheer joy.
It's
because
kind of the Duel of Fates moment.
yeah,
musically.
her
theme.
Her theme is fantastic. The way that the chorus gets brought in, the chanting. I mean, it's so good.
And the music, the in-universe music, which, by the way, I really think that it's about time they get an in-universe CD put out. Now that apparently Resistance has put some in-universe version of rock in.
Yes, that was pretty cool.
We have almost enough in-universe music, including now the Imperial March from the recruitment video, which is the Imperial March and a major theme.
Yeah, they play it during the parades, too.
Yeah.
And
on Life Day.
I think that's fantastic. I think we could have a in-universe music CD, unless you call Christmas Among the Stars an in-universe.
So you're saying you want them to put out a CD of smooth jizz?
Yep.
Is that what you want?
I mean,
I'd buy that.
I would. I would. No doubt about it. I would buy some smooth jizz.
Yeah, they also really need to work
they
on
need
that.
a better name.
By the way, for those of you who don't know, the official type of music that sounds like jazz to us, according to George Lucas, so it's canon, was called jizz at the time. I don't think George Lucas knew what he thought he was naming, but that is the official name for in-universe music.
Is that still true, though? I mean, Disney could easily say that that's not the case.
Disney definitely would probably never even comment on it.
Yeah, probably not.
I am sure there's a Comic-Con somewhere, someone's going to bring it up, and they're just going to stare at them, and we're like, next question.
Fair enough. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of fun to talk about Solo, not just as a movie, but, like, how it's impacted the franchise and just kind of the wider ramifications of it. Getting into the more nitty-gritty of the movie itself, I loved how connected to all of the Star Wars universe this movie felt.
Yes.
Tobias Beckett is the one who pushed Aura Singh to her death. Like, that's such a kind of that's a slightly deeper cut reference. And I mean, like, the Terrace Kasi reference, like, what is that? So it was just cool the way this movie felt so, like it was just part of this larger galaxy. And this was I think this one did that for me a lot more than Rogue One did.
And some good name dropping. One of the ones that was interesting, because I'd heard the term, was it Black Spire?
Yes,
yeah.
Black Spire.
Black Spire got mentioned, which I was like, I'm pretty sure that was in one of the Thrawn books.
Yes.
And then, of course, we look it up, and that's the name of the city in Batuu, which is now, which we're probably going to mention on every podcast, or every one of these videos, because it's the big thing coming out for Star Wars right now. And
well, I mean, this just shows me how much of a conscious effort Disney has been making to unify the Star Wars franchise in such a way where different books, movies, and now theme park attractions are all going to be referencing, similar locations. And yes, there is a cynical marketing side to that, for sure. But it's cool.
Another neat thing about Star Wars, and this is unrelated to Solo, but Solo had great world building.
Yeah.
And with the new streaming service coming out, I keep and like the things I've been seeing about Batuu and things, which is all really world building with the new Disney thing. I was like, they could do a live, like a reality show, and maybe we can do an entire video on this, but they could do a reality show for the streaming service, like Star Wars world building, where you get people together and they design a world for some Star Wars event. I think that could be a good way for their streaming, but that's way off from Solo, so we can.
Carly, take us somewhere. What do you want to talk about?
Take us somewhere that's irrelevant.
Exactly. What would you like to talk about in relation to Solo?
I'll just go back to what Solo's doing for the Star Wars lore right now.
Yeah.
I really liked Enfys Nest's contribution kind of to the lore, because we see this group of people who the rest of the galaxy pretty much sees as just marauders and pirates and people who are just doing this for money. They don't know what their cause is. And I think it ties in really well to the group that we meet in Rogue One, who are like these hardcore rebels who like don't even care if the rest of the galaxy is kind of afraid of them or like whatever they're doing, because they believe that what they're doing is right. So I think that this is just a really cool tie-in, that like this is how the rebels started. Was like just stealing from people and doing all this sort of stuff to get the resources to build up.
Yeah.
And we do see there's 2 characters in Enfys Nest's group that are of note. One just happens to be Warwick Davis without a mask.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was nice to see.
Yeah.
And has it been confirmed it was the same character he played in episode 1 without the mask that we see really quickly in a crowd shop?
I have no idea if that's confirmed or not.
No idea.
Yeah, that's something to
I'd be kind of surprised,
in the comments.
I'd be kind of surprised, but maybe.
But the other one being Two Tubes, who is definitely part of Saw Gerrera's band of rebels.
Well, yeah, because she takes the coaxium to Saw Gerrera after all this.
And he is one of the few people that survives the destruction of the rest of Saw Gerrera's group. Mm-hmm. And he appears in comics later on.
Yeah, and I mean, going to Rogue One, I mean, because, you know, Saw Gerrera, obviously a character who originated in Clone Wars, who then, you know, the first character to really originate in something and then make them their way onto film. And I think the anthology films as a whole seem to really be where we're getting a lot of the bridging between movies and non-movies. And I hope that trend continues. You know, I hope in an anthology movie we get like a live-action Cad Bane or something like that. Yeah. You know, I hope that's a trend that we get to see continue.
I mean, it's just refreshing to see, because usually we have all these books and things that build up this world of Star Wars, and then an episode comes out and completely, like, kind of goes against things we already know about the Star Wars world if you're really, really following it.
Yeah.
So it's just nice to have these movies come out that actually acknowledge the TV shows and the comics and stuff as just as canon as the movies.
It's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, I don't necessarily want people who are writing and directing the new Star Wars episodes to be constricted, yeah. Because you hear stories about that all the time in the comic book industry, right? Like, some guy wants to write a Spider-Man story, but they can't write this specific story because this character's dead and this character's currently on another plane of existence because it's going to tie into their big in-universe crossover event. I don't want Star Wars to become that. But at the same time, it's cool to see the consistency between the films, the books, the novels, the comics, and the TV shows. And I don't want to lose that, because when it's done well, I think it feels really special and cool.
But the Star Wars universe is big enough that you can kind of build out. And that's what's going to be neat if Rian Johnson still gets to do his unrelated Star Wars trilogy.
Yeah, which I'm super hyped for.
It's going to give us a whole nother section of the galaxy, maybe another time period, that you can tell any story you want, because there's nothing you can step on the toes of. Han Solo...
Assuming it's not a Mass Effect Andromeda type situation, yes.
Oh, yeah.
But that's an entirely different thing.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, it's the Star Wars universe. There's empires within the galaxy. Mm-hmm. There's other things going on. There are people who were not involved in the Galactic Civil War. Mandalore itself was thousands of planets with an entire huge amount of stories that you never would have had to have been involved in any way with the Galactic Empire. That's a small part of its history. And that's what I love about Star Wars is, even though, yes, you may not be able to tell the story of Luke Skywalker fighting,
someone.
Yeah, General Grievous. Because there's no way that can happen. Oh, maybe they found his parts and brought his brain back. And
Mr. Bones uses some General Grievous programming, so...
That's true, he does.
If they could recover that and put it in Mr. Bones, then who knows?
Oh, right, maybe he is essentially Grievous reincarnated. But would Grievous really be more on the side of Luke, since it's now against the Empire from which Grievous fought? But Grievous was more anti-Jedi than pro-Separatist. That's a whole nother story for another video.
Let's get into some Grievous politics now. That has nothing to do with Solo, but that's why we're...
I mean, that's the thing, is that Solo, I feel like there's already been a million people talking about, like I said, the specifics of the story, you know, like, what's the good character arcs, what are the kind of, you know, I don't want to say, like, what are the plot holes, but, like, where are the kind of weird inconsistencies, where does the movie do well, where does the movie fall short? I think that's been well uncovered. I think what's interesting is looking back at Solo and what Solo means in a broader perspective. I will say, though, something I never thought of that you brought up, if their whole thing is that, you brought this up when we were watching it, Carly, if the whole thing is that Dryden's like, oh man, the Pikes, we have an uneasy alliance with them, and Han and Beckett are like, oh, well, the Pikes don't know us, they don't know we're working for you, so we can go do this. Why is he like, oh, cool, take my second in command, who has the Crimson Dawn logo branded on her arm? Yeah, just take her. That, yeah, like, would they not recognize her?
All right, I think you just said that we've done enough about, like, plot holes and stuff. Like, yes, clearly
I
that
view
is
her as an in-house second in command. Kind of like
but she's still
that
got the
person in the
marks,
office
so, like,
that no one knows who they are.
That's possible, but she's still tattooed. So, like, if anything happened to the group, they would be like, this was clearly Crimson Dawn.
You saw she covers it up regularly with clothing.
Yeah, I'm sure they won't.
Yeah, they're not going to check. They're not going to check. That's.
But no.
The Pikes don't do that.
Like, regardless, like, yeah, there are some plot holes in this movie. I don't think they break the movie. I think the movie's still very enjoyable.
I think Dryden Voss's plan was, if they're going to die, it's going to be because the entire ship is disintegrated by unstable coaxium, not by the initial battle to get the thing. I don't know what he was thinking. Yeah. But then again, you know, he did die at the end of the movie, so he wasn't infallible.
Yeah.
He did make stupid, emotional decisions that got him killed.
Yeah, and that was just a small point that I thought of while I was saying that. But, yeah, I mean, looking at Solo, how it connects to the rest of the franchise, I really like the way that we essentially... Because I think Solo has a couple points that people have pointed out of, like, very obvious fan service, like when the Imperial officer names him Han Solo, and kind of a cheeky, you know, wink-wink, that's pretty obvious. But there's other stuff in this movie.
Fan service, fan slap in the face. It's hard to say. Because you got both people on both sides going, I think that was great. I think it was horrible.
But
go ahead.
There's other stuff in this movie that sets things up in other films in a much more subtle way that's really cool. I'm thinking specifically of when L3 gets programmed into the Millennium Falcon, and now we have essentially an origin for when C-3PO and Empire is saying, I don't know where your ship learned to talk so weird, you know, like, you know, that's, we didn't get a specific, like, line about, oh man, now the ship's gonna sound like L3, but, like, you can just kind of extrapolate.
I mean, you kind of do when Lando's reading the thing and he's, like, 90 degrees leftish and stuff, and it's kind of implied that that's, like, L3's thinking.
Yeah, maybe.
But, yeah, there's no explicit line about it.
Yeah. By the way, and this isn't, this was just something that I thought of while I was watching the show. Lando, I love the character of Lando. He's come so far since the original trilogy. I mean, with his cameos in Rebels, his comic series, and this, he's become a full-fledged character. Before he was kind of a B character that had a lot of potential in my mind, but wasn't well used.
Yeah. And
one of the neat things is in his comic series, he keeps yelling out, I don't know how to shoot a blaster. He, like, yells it constantly at people. And then, like, you know, if you've ever played Battlefront, you know that he's like, his special ability is sharpshooter and things like that. But in the comics, finally he pulls out a blaster and shoots someone really well. And, like, it was just, like, no contest. And they're like, I thought you didn't know how to shoot. And he goes, no, I just make sure everyone who sees me shoot is dead. And then I tell everyone I don't know how to shoot, so when I get to that point, it's a lot easier to fight. And that's, I just love Lando, and I think that was really captured well in Solo, that whole duplicitous...
Yeah.
And the way he kind of, like, had that gentleman scoundrel moment at the end when the card is missing from his sleeve, and he's like, oh well, jig's up, okay.
Oh yeah.
And he was okay with it.
I mean, we're shown very early that this is a guy who's willing to lie, cheat, and, you know, do whatever he needs to do.
I don't like it. I don't agree with him.
Yeah. but I understand it. And
but
so
I
I'm
accept it.
yeah, but I
Actually
accept
the
it.
line. Go ahead.
This deal keeps getting worse all the time.
Yeah. But, you know, you're introduced to this character, and it's like with Han, I think you're very clearly able to see, like, exactly how this guy evolves into the guy that we're going to meet in the original trilogy. And one thing I like about this movie is that when you get to the end and they have their, like, rematch, that easily could have been the last time they talked to each other before we get to Empire. Probably wasn't. In fact, I think in Last Shot they meet again. But, you know, that easily could have been the last time, and it still would have worked just fine. Because obviously, you know, they do meet again, but, you know, for just regular audiences who aren't reading the novels, that still sets up their reunion in 5 really well.
Yeah, the hug. The way they hugged was very similar to the way they hugged.
Yeah.
And Han took the card from him.
Yeah, and that was something that, again, was not quite as in your face of a setup as the Han Solo and the, like, shortening of Chewbacca's name. Like, those are, you know, things that are callbacks and are references and setups, but they're not quite as obvious, and they work really well.
And Dryden Voss's office
is filled with so much good stuff.
It was like, I think someone must have said, "Hey, Dave, you got any story ideas?" "Oh yeah, I've got thousands." "Well, give us some props we can throw in this room, and we're gonna let you tell them someday."
Yeah, he's got Mandalorian armor. He's got some lightsabers. He's got whatever those dagger things he uses.
Some really neat crystals and things. Just a lot of options that he's got in that room, and
yeah,
just so many things that they're going to be able to use at a later time.
Yeah. Good stuff. So, speaking of things they would want to use as a later time, what would you like to see come of Solo? Do you want to see a Solo 2 where we see more of Alden, or would you rather we spin off and maybe learn more about what happens to Kira after this movie? Given that they said they're going to slow down on the anthology films, we're going to probably, we're going to wrap up the trilogy first and then go from there. But assuming they do revisit this little pocket of the Star Wars universe, what would your ideal follow-up to this film be? Do you have one?
I would say for probably, like, the third time in this conversation, Enfys Nest, and see how, like... Because, I guess we see some of, like... In Rogue One, we see some Rebel stuff, but we don't see the rebellion form. It's already there.
Yeah.
So I still think that there are stories that could be explored with Enfys Nest, especially considering we see that, like, Two Tubes is with Saw Gerrera, but we don't know why he's not with Enfys anymore. So, like, I don't know if something happened to her because she's not in the original trilogy, so something could have. There are some theories there and stuff.
Or nothing.
Yeah, or nothing, we don't know.
It's just like any first... oddly enough, like, the only people that, like, really died off was, like, all the original command staff from Yavin in A New Hope gets killed off in the comics before Empire Strikes Back.
She doesn't even necessarily have to be killed off. Like, there are all kinds of things that could have happened.
But that's what I'm saying is, like, other than that strange group of people all ending up dead just for no reason, apparently, Enfys Nest, they could just been freedom fighting somewhere else. They could have been a different cell. There were other rebel cells. We just followed the ones that the main characters were with at those times.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to see Enfys Nest show up again. I think of all the characters, like, I like Kira. I'd like to see her again. I'd like to see what's going on with Maul. But of the characters that have the most staying power that were new characters,
Kira and Enfys Nest.
Yeah, Kira and Enfys Nest, but I would say Enfys Nest over Kira. I really like Enfys Nest a lot. I think she's a character that we hopefully have a lot more to do with. She better get a comic or something. I've, heard people speculating based off nothing, but just like it'd be cool if she showed up in the Cassian show. And I think that's an awesome place to use her. I think that would be an amazing place to put her. So Enfys Nest is definitely one of the things I latched onto real hard with this movie. Kira and Darth Maul, like I said, I do want to see how we get Darth Maul at the end of this movie to Darth Maul in Rebels. But I think Enfys Nest is really interesting, and I want to see what they do with her.
And I'd love to see something. I'd like to see an end to Kira's storyline. I think she deserves a good ending. I think that her character is interesting enough. There's no way you can just leave it with, well, we knew she worked with Maul, and that's as far as her story goes.
Anyone who works with Maul is probably worth learning a little bit more about.
And it's,
I mean, like,
with
it's
her,
also
it's got to be more than a comic.
potentially possible, knowing what we know about her. Like, maybe Crimson Dawn didn't actually die. Maybe she sold out Darth Maul to, like, the Empire. Like, who knows?
Oh, yeah.
Like, maybe she's the one who, like, told them where to find him on Dathomir, and so that's why he's living in exile when we meet him in Rebels.
Ooh,
like, who
yeah.
knows?
I think
are
there's
lots of
also
things you
room
could do
for,
there.
for Han to run into her again. And maybe Han has to deal with her again. You know?
I think
There's room for her and Han to have another run-in.
I think that's possible. I don't know if I necessarily would want to see that. I don't know.
I don't think it's
feel
necessary.
like it ended pretty well in this movie, so I would be fine with them never seeing each other again. But
I would like to see a Han Solo Jabba the Hutt.
Yeah.
With how he lost the spice. That would be a nice little story. And at this point, I think people like kind of Hutt politics as much as anything else. With the Clone Wars, it was nice to see how those things work a little bit. And for those of you who played the fantasy or have seen the Fantasy Flight games, role-playing games, there's an entire source book for the Hutts alone. And they're just fascinating. And then there's a Hutt in... there's an athletic version of a Hutt in one of the comic series that collects Jedi artifacts. And he kind of runs into some trouble with Luke Skywalker, and then it turns out like he is like the Hulk Hogan of Hutts.
Nice.
And he just hulks out, and he just like is battling Luke and stormtroopers and the Empire, and it is crazy. But I would like to see some more Hutts, and I think that would be a great little movie with Han losing the shipment, and I think that could be a fun film. And this movie set it up well for we're heading to Tatooine.
Yeah. Well, I know this has been really rambly. We're coming up on almost an hour. It's just been fun to just kind of spitball and talk about this movie. Carly, any final places you want to take us before we wrap it up here?
I don't think so. I think for the most part we've covered, like, I'm just really happy with this movie in general.
Yeah.
I think it opens up a lot of doors and then kind of explains some things at the same time about the Star Wars universe.
Exactly. And this movie gave me what I wanted, which is, I'm not opposed to something being set in Galactic Civil War era. I'm just glad we got something that is not 100% focused on the Galactic Civil War. I was excited to see a story that has the Empire as just more of a backdrop and not being the primary source of conflict. And I'm a sucker for a good performance, and Alden really won me over.
I enjoyed seeing, just a more of a lived-in universe. Star Wars has always been part of that lived-in universe aesthetic, and it was great to see what a major port of entry looks like with normal people walking around it, what a shipyard really looks like, what a mining facility looks like, what an impound station looks like, what seedy underbelly bars look like with illegal gambling institutions on 2 different types of planets. There was a lot of really neat, I've said it before on these videos, and I will probably say it again. It was nice to see not the rich and the famous and the powerful, but the, where people live. Even if it was still the seedy underbelly of where people live, it was nice to see that again.
Yeah, definitely. I don't really have much else to add. Like I said, this is just kind of us rambling and talking about a movie we all really enjoy. And hope we get to see more like it, honestly. And I think that'll be about it. And I've been Matt.
I'm Carly.
And I will continue being Rob.
Thank you, because if you don't, no one else will want to be.
That's true.